No. I'm going to create literature. That's what
That's
we're
good.
going to
That's
do.
good. So you don't need the video? Well, I wanted to, if she wants to look at me, she can. Well, but you're good. The camera's over here, so she could be, she's not going to see you. I don't understand. Okay, well, you might as well just leave the video off. Well, I want to talk to her. You can still talk to her through the microphone. But the camera's all the way over here, so I can't tell you where your face is. She's probably going to see half your face. Well, right here. See, I'm
Son.
not listed. Why am
I think
not
it's
listed?
his son.
I bet you're right there. Oh.
It's Mike Murphy. Yeah. Okay. All right. What the topic is sort of collecting family stories. And that family could be, as it was at St. Anne's, collecting stories of the people who had worked there for years and knew the history. It could be a company that wants to check in on its own, or a church who wants to kind of compile, as you guys did in the last 4 weeks. And this is how you do it. And how I know how to do it. Maybe there's probably another way, but if you'd like to take a copy of the agenda. Oh, I've heard somewhere that you don't teach adults without giving them a list of what's going to happen, so they'll know how far you've gone and when they're getting out of here. So all I do is just touch. Ah, yes. Okay. So the first thing on the agenda is why do this? And I've always wanted to know people's stories. That's just the nature of my being, and particularly stories that connected with the history that I knew of our country and our world, and how these individuals connected in it. So this is a story that she was Harry's grandmother, and she was quite the lady. She was the poor cousin of a very rich and wealthy family in Philadelphia. And so if there was going to be a formal dinner party and they needed another woman, they would call her to come sit at the party with all of these famous people that they knew and dealt with all the time. And so she had these connections to the world that certainly I've never had. But until I talked with her, I think she thought that nobody really cared, and she wasn't going to volunteer her stories because it would just, bore people, perhaps. It was anything but boring. She was, so anyway, one time, about 2 years after we were married, she came down by herself and just visited us, which was at my invitation. And that's when I listened to her stories and begged for more. This is one of her stories, her family, and it's very short, but this is her handwriting. So Addison, I'm not quite sure whether he was a second cousin or something, but Addison was in the Quartermaster Corps of the U.S. Army and invited to France by the French in 1914 to observe the French army. And then the quotes are here. He is the one, they tell the tale of being at the making of the Treaty of Versailles, where they'd reached an impasse. He stopped in to ask the chef how soon lunch could be. And he actually helped change the clocks so that they could go to lunch early. And when they finished, he came back and they signed the treaty. So that was just a sample, just a tiny sample of what you might find if you actually ask the people in your family about what they're up to or what they did. So why do this? Well, in her case, I think I showed respect and care for her as a person telling her stories. And that would be a primary reason to do it altogether. Why do it? So the next generation will know that they're part of a family who was there, here and there for this or that. And I think my grandson would probably pay a little closer attention to history if he knows that his great-great-grandfather, who carried his name, almost carried his name. It was William Henry or William Harry instead of Harry William, was at the Battle of Antietam. I think his life will be more interesting because of it. You can provide others with a sense of connection to the past. And that would be him, but my own son is going to inherit all this stuff, and I hope he just doesn't burn it. But,
Did you ask her to come down and share?
No, I asked her to come down and visit. It was the middle of winter and we were in Mississippi and in Gulfport, and it was warm. And she really didn't have any place to go, that was interesting or fun. And that was when I really, for the first time, got in touch and acquainted with her. My husband had only known her as the woman who would correct him for not using the right silverware or.
Good Episcopalian.
Yeah. So actually, she was Quaker.
An Episcopalian spirit.
Yes, I agree. Well, a lot more than that,
Don't eat your main course with your salad fork.
Right. But also, don't make bathtub gin when it's illegal in the country in a bathtub on the Naval Academy grounds.
That you remind me of during Prohibition, the sheriff in the town would come to my grandfather and say, "Mr. Marfia, are you making wine? It's against the law." "Oh, no, I only have grape juice."
Yeah.
So when the sheriff would leave, my grandpa would say to his son, "Sam, go get my special grape juice."
Yeah. Maybe you do it because you achieve, if you tell your own story, a little bit of more immortality on Earth. Your name will not be forgotten in the sense of Native Americans, perhaps, or something on that order. One good reason is to survive the holidays. Have something to do with that aunt who's sitting next to you. But any others that you can think of for doing this that aren't up there?
The DNA research gave us a venue to follow up on historical facts of our family by where to go and what to do. For instance, my aunts would always tell us that we weren't just Sicilian, we were Sicilian Romano. But the DNA evidence said my grandfather and grandmother both came from Sicily. My grandfather did not come from Rome. And so I think the aunts were embellishing our social status in the Italian peninsula, right, by saying Romano Siciliano makes you a Napolese. You're a little higher up than what you're supposed to be.
Okay. Anybody think of another good reason to prove your grandmother's a liar? Okay.
Well, I have some brief story about that. My maiden name is Hughes, which I was always told was Welsh. And that's all my life. And then I started doing genealogy 50 years ago and discovered we were in fact Irish.
Mhm.
And the family didn't really want to hear that.
Yeah, so finding the truth.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a family at St. Anne's, had two boys. She had married an African American, and the boys had to deal with classes where you were supposed to find out what your heritage was, and they couldn't. And so she saw to it that they did the genetic test, and they found out that they were from Togo, and it made a whole big difference in those kids, how they felt about themselves. So, okay, so that's one of the reasons. All right. So how do you go about it? There are steps if you want to do it correctly, especially if you're doing it for an organization and not just yourself. For instance, if we did some interviews with some of the elders in this parish, which I have to scratch my head because I'm probably one of them, but these are some things you would do. Even if it's your own parent or your own grandmother or your husband's grandmother, and getting the full name with the middle names that indicate heritage is a good idea. And certainly don't start an interview with anybody unless you can pronounce the name. You'll probably turn them off if you keep stumbling over it. So get the record of the birth, the place of birth, current date, your relationship to the speaker, and their current contact information in case you need to call and find out if what you thought you heard, you actually did. And then choose together whether you want to record their voice or not, or video the encounter or not, take notes or not, or just listen. Okay. With some people, if you start bringing machinery into it, they're going to clam up. So even taking notes is not going to work too well. Can you think of other things that you might want to do? You might want to arrange space for doing it. Make sure it's not going to be interrupted by the cat or the 5-year-old in the house or something.
When doing the interview, if you
Mhm.
as much information as you can have, you can then ask questions. Is this correct? Was this date correct? And my brother Frank, when he interviewed my Aunt Mary, who lived to be 92, he was able to glean from her the information he had was about 80% correct. Sometimes it was a spelling of a name or a location. We thought they were in this town and they were in another town. We didn't know that they also lived in Chicago during the Depression and lost the house. We didn't know any of that. But by asking her those questions, she was able to fill in those areas. So the more that you can kind of say, is this correct? Or were you over here? From what I've learned, does this make sense? She really correctly gave us the background on our family from that side of the family.
Right. And you would do that after the initial discussion. You have a discussion where you, in my opinion, where you would just listen straight through. You might write it up and then go back and say, is this correct here, here, and here? But not to interrupt in the original discussion, because people get in a flow and you ask a question and they may just stop forever. Yeah.
I would say that if you can persuade the person to let you record it, that would be just ideal.
It is. And at St. Anne's, we videoed a lot of these. And there was one person who said, I just can't talk to a camera. And so I sat next to the camera and was the intentioned listener and responded with my face and so forth to what she was saying, and it made it so much easier for her to talk. Okay, so how do you use your body to encourage a person you're interviewing to talk? You know what an open stance of your body is? And a closed stance, yeah. One of the crossing legs and arms pretty much tells the other person that you're not really willing to hear a lot. Even if you're cold. But an open stance is the opposite of that. Sitting if you're wearing pants, women can do this, you know, just their legs are open, their arms are not crossed, but open. Hands could be up to show more of a receiving, but you have to be comfortable, but nevertheless, it's an open stance. And if you're wearing a skirt and with a woman, then crossing at your ankles is certainly acceptable. That doesn't seem, but crossing at your knees would be not too good, or closing in would do that. With some people, face-to-face is just fine, but you'll find some others would rather have you sit next to them and you'd both stare into space as they tell you things. So you may want to, you know, especially if you're dealing with painful subjects, it may turn out that you might want to sit side by side rather than facing. Okay. There is something called mirroring. When you are in a deep conversation with someone, the person listening, without knowing it, will mirror the posture and mannerisms of the person they're listening to. So at St. Anne's, I used to go sort of help teachers and out after they've had a rough interview, just kind of give them a moment to debrief before they went into another on teacher parent day. And I could just go down the hall and see whether the interview was going well or not based on the mirroring. So that happens. So when you guys practice in a few minutes, I'll be looking for that. But you can also, if you're having a hard time getting through to them as a listener, you can consciously mirror that person. Now, I wouldn't recommend it. It's better to do it naturally, but if you're in a real jam, you can try that. When they're talking, be still and quiet. Don't fidget. Don't, you know, do whatever tics you have. You know,
My email.
Pardon?
I should be checking my email.
No, put your phone away. I should have that on this list. Turn your phone off. Okay. And go ahead and allow your face to express your emotions as you're hearing what they're saying, which is different from, say, a psychiatric interview. So, okay. All right. So that's how you use your body. How do you use your mind? And this I used to teach to 5th and 6th graders at St. Anne's. And so here's rule number 1. Do not think of a story of your own that matches the circumstance of the story they're describing. This is not a normal conversation. It's not give and take. One person is talking. And if you are thinking about how to tell your own story next, you're not listening. That's very hard for 5th and 6th graders.
Never mind adults.
Well, you're right. Okay. Do not interrupt the flow of the story with questions. Okay, you can file them away and ask them when they're done to clarify things, but don't do it while they're in the midst of the sweep of the story. Be able, when they're finished, to briefly recap what you heard and do so they know that they were heard. And if you're shocked by what you hear, file that away and keep listening. That's where you begin to do the psychiatrist thing. Decide later whether to comment on your reaction. And if you're amazed, intrigued, or admiring, file that away also until it's done. Okay? Because if you stop them and say, wow, that was something, then they might feel triggered to tell you more about that when in fact the whole story is on the other side of this. So, okay, so that's what you do with your mind, which means you're being active. You're being active in listening, but you don't look like you're being active. Okay. Then what do you do when you're finished? Well, what I did with Harry's grandmother was encourage her to write this stuff down. I didn't have to do it. And in fact, dear Mary and Harry, I finally got around to writing my family background as Mary requested at Christmas. So, so you can encourage them to write it, which is better than you're writing it. And they can edit what they think the family needs to know, maybe what they think the family should never know. But it may happen that they wouldn't write if it was the last thing in the world. So you can volunteer to write it for them, give them an opportunity to read it and edit it, help with your help. But if you do that, okay. All right, ready to practice?
Very question for you.
Yes.
I think you talked about this earlier, but in the setting, is it like you and that person, or could be two other family members and that person, or?
You possibly could have two other listening, but you'd have to make them swear not to get into it, just be very quiet, which means they probably can't be there. Just to sit alone with somebody and talk is better. And then you can retell the story to others and they can do their input at that time, I think. Does that make sense?
That'd be an interesting though, interesting.
Yeah.
That'd
If-
be a totally different thing.
It would be a different thing, or if they all agreed that they would let this person tell the story in the way that you are, then they might have more interesting questions at the end for clarification than you would come up with. So it's not a no-no, it's just, probably going to work better because I don't know, I can't think of very many of my closer relatives that would ever do anything I said. Just the way we are. Okay, so we're going to break into pairs and we're going to practice this. Okay, a story that you want to tell. Do you guys want to do this together, or you want to do this separately? Well, up to you. So find your partner. Okay, plan to spend 3 or 4 minutes telling your anecdote. It should be true. Okay. Practice sitting with your open stance. Choose whether you're going I think all of you would prefer to look at each other rather than to be side by side. And when you're done telling your story, your listener will summarize it in a couple of sentences, not the whole thing, and ask any questions that they want to. And then we'll switch. You sure you want to do this? You could. Anyway, okay, ready?
Sure.
You'll have to decide who goes first. You want to straighten your chairs in a way. Do you want to do this?
We're good.
Okay.
I don't want to share any of my story. Yeah. So, here's where the girl is meeting houses. It's called
You might have. But in experience, also but that.
didn't see what it's been 100 years. Next year.
Let's go.
Still going. I can't participate in this part of it, so I'm chasing the squirrels away. Because you have to share with somebody.
So I did a lot of things. That's what they're really like. And I actually. So I don't. It's just, yes, the relationship. And I was. So that's what that was. And finding out they were Irish. And my grandfather just said he was. So, but it was. He's really interesting. Well, what's that? I'm struggling. And back to the first. Then. So. Previously. Well, yeah. Then so that's me. Yeah, so that's and then I asked this was there's no set for living, so yeah, I had a question here about. Yes, yeah, yeah, and the history in the fascination. So he has okay, and why we are For making us and so you say, my dates, please, that he had, and then sort of source information. And that's really nice. To do that, she come in my house and said, oh, you cast me, so. Yeah, so I stand. And I'll look out when you're right. So all the lights. Just drive. See how else. It's in this part. But I can look away because he finding pictures of so. Well, it's kind of like an index to somebody when we drive in the he. And we are. Sitting down. Somebody giving. Nations. Yeah. Yeah. Not him, somebody, but we take 6. So, yeah, you know. And then we can use, yes, yeah, and we are. It's a matter of so yeah, that's snapshot. Because that area, and I could see they we knew that was next. And they was helpful for that. So. Do you have grown kids? Oh, okay, now. Here are lots of nieces and their mom. Hey guys. They know each other, but there's a lot of stories. Celebrating. Yeah.
Hey. So,
It's not like me to sit on.
But you didn't have a problem.
No, I didn't. Oh, I thought you were gonna do that. Hey, what was it like to be? Okay. What was it like for someone listening to you? This now. This happened often in your life.
I thought, so, I thought it was really fun from my perspective, to be able to, just be as the asking questions. And then you get to find out a little bit more about that individual
mhm,
and what they're willing to share.
Mhm.
And how they wanna. The setting was, where she was telling me a little bit about what she's gonna be doing at Thanksgiving with a relative to find out more about their history
mhm.
or her history. And you know, it's just interesting that we don't do it enough of that, I don't think. And it's really rich
Mhm.
information. So it was cool to hear what she's planning on doing.
And how did you feel about being heard yourself?
For me, it's a little more difficult. I'm more interested in.
Someone
sharing
else, yeah.
what other people have versus me,
Mhm,
but it was a situation that was unique to what we're explaining here today.
mhm.
So it felt fun.
Good. How about you?
I agree. It was fun.
She hated it.
Yes, and very well.
Wonderful, and responses to what I told him about my grandparents, just smile and visit, you know, just I'm very happy and wanted to share it.
Mhm.
It was positive, very positive.
Cool.
But I did keep finding out that I would say, oh, yes, and things like that were, when I listened to him, and you're supposed to be quiet, right? Anyway.
It isn't a terrible thing you did.
Okay.
So- How about you guys? Do you have people that listen to you a lot?
Loaded.
Good question. Mhm.
I thought this was marvelous. It's really important to hear other people
Mhm.
and not have an agenda or a response. It feels really good to just think back into yourself, open yourself up to a person and just receive what they're saying. That feels good spiritually.
Mhm.
Would you tell briefly what you did with your great aunt?
Oh, so my anecdote that I told Sandy is I did do an oral history of my great aunt who lived to be 104. And the remarkable thing about her is she lived in 3 different centuries. And she did a really marvelous job. Number one, I taped it, so I still have her voice. And she did a marvelous job of relating her life and her reaction to like technological advancements. She remembers when she first took an airplane. We were in Seattle. She took an airplane to Hawaii. And also, I knew that her version of the truth, kind of strange. I allowed her to tell her story the way she lived it and she believed she lived it. So that was really important. My father, who was a total pragmatist, just laughed at this whole thing, you know, and just said, that's not the way it happened. It transcribed, I summarized her story, and my cousin who was an artist and my great aunt who was an artist. We put together a little book and gave it to everybody in the family. And it's still a reference in our family. We still use it. We still go back and go, who's that person? Yeah, let's look at that. So that was another gift that came with us.
Well, and I would echo what Pete said, that, I mean, we've been on this committee together and known each other for a long time, but it was a deepening of my understanding of who you are and of our relationship. So that was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
And Sandy related her story of being home with her two young daughters and getting into genealogy at that point. And she has amassed notebooks. She wrote to churches.
Well, or I got public documents. You could do that in those days. You just mail off to the county where the marriage happened. And they'd send you this certificate, and I have them all.
And she's assembled these binders. Reader.
Yeah.
So she's an investigator.
How about you guys?
I guess what my initial thought or reaction was, you for your spouse, you think you know them very well, but there's a lot of stories and parts of their life that you don't know. So this was just one little snippet of asking about something you didn't know about. So I thought it was a lot of fun and enjoyed that. But you-
So what we did there was, because it's like Rod said, we know a lot about each other, obviously, after all this time. So I suggested that we each pick something that we already had some knowledge of the other person. But ask. So for example, I asked Rod to tell me how he met his first wife, which I obviously know about it, but I didn't know how they first met. Okay. And he asked me about a question about my oldest brother. And so of course he knows he's met my oldest brother, but anyway, so it was pretty cool actually. But Rod kind of has a story about it's not genealogy so much, but you want to tell.
Yeah, sure. My dad years ago, I mean, he's always telling stories.
Same ones over and over.
Well, yeah. So he at some point with my mom, he started basically telling his stories, and she started writing the stories down. And then she typed up the stories, and I took all of that Word document and put it in a book, leather bound it for his 75th or 80th birthday. Gave everybody off at the family, a book of the history. And he was quite candid in the story. I mean, there's some X-rated parts of the story. So the younger kids were more interested in maybe sitting down and reading parts of the book.
Look at page 7.
Right when you did that, was it full disclosure? I mean, you didn't edit any of that stuff. Oh, no. I mean, all I did was, my mom had just typed pieces together, and so there was like 10 different sets of Word documents, and so I put it all together in one document, and then went to a bookbinder and got them to bind the book and leather cover and all that. So that was cool. What you did? And I had the book. I don't know all the details now, but it was. I kind of presented. I had two brothers, so I presented to him as the three brothers. Because I talked to my brothers, and so it was a joint project. But so it was kind of his son presenting the book,
And I think I titled it something about
Life and times
of Doug Huddle.
of.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The life and times of the, I think he actually sort of titled it that way. Or something.
Mhm.
By the way.
Well, no, so his mom, like Rod said, typed it up, and I think the original, when she put it all together and gave it to you, the title page, I think, was Life and Times of Doug Huddle.
Cool.
Oh, that's neat. What is it?
Well, I thank you all. I know you've got to get to the service. We told, I told shorter stories. I don't think I want to tell you the story I told.
Were you in the confessional?
Oh, it was about catching a fish.
And I told the story of being a 2-day-old parent.
Oh.
And having their 7-year university. So. But somebody mentioned this, and I caught myself, I won't say I caught myself, I did it, and then I realized I did it, and I responded verbally to something that you had said.
Mhm.
And that, sort of affirmate that
Mhm.
affirmation, oh, yeah, well, and
It didn't stop anything. And you know, you can make that kind of mistake and you'll be okay. But if you're, you know, anyway, it worked out pretty well, I think. And I'm glad you all came and have fun at Thanksgiving.
That's excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
something good.
Okay.